Welcome to today's episode. Why is my child failing in school? Now, this is a big question and I'm going to answer it for you today. But before I go on, welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button below if you haven't. And if you can, refer a friend so that we can really get on top of YouTube's algorithm and get this message out there. So why is your child failing in school? I presume you're here because your child is failing in school. That's why you've searched this option. Having spent now 10 years researching and developing performance learning, I've pretty much concluded that it comes down to 3 reasons. Now, I've backed this up now with working with just under 300 schools, of which most of them, I get the students who are failing. I get the students who are underperforming, and it's only recently we've started to work with schools that are really high-performing schools. But for the best part of 5 to 7 years, it really was some of the most challenging schools in the country with some of the most challenging pupils in the country who were really failing. Most of the time, it was hard to get them even to turn up to school. Attendance rates was almost below 50%, so they were turning up half the time. So it was inevitable that they were going to fail. Now, I'm sure your child is not going through that level of extremities, but if they're sort of good in one subject, not so good in other subjects, or they used to be good in a certain subject, but the older they've gotten, they've just, for some reason, their performance has declined. That's really common. Like I said to you, it's 3 key reasons. Imagine dividing your child into 3 categories. Category 1, their intellectual readiness to learn. Category 2, their emotional resilience. And category 3, a blend of both. Now, you'll find, if I break these down for you, intellectual readiness comes down to their core skill set. Not necessarily skills on what to learn, but more how to learn, the process of learning. Now, I break this down into 7 core areas. So if you haven't got a pen, grab a pen right now, or pause this video so you can write these 7 steps down. I call these my 7 steps to genius. And step number 1 of my 7 steps are your ability to organize information. Have you noticed in, let's say, heavy text-based subjects that when they start to read something, the minute they start to read it, they lose interest? Or if you're a student listening to this, how many times have you started to read something, all of a sudden you start thinking about what you want to eat, or a thought enters into your head that you haven't thought about in years or never really ever thought about? And that happens as soon as you start reading The Process of the Carbon Cycle or Henry VIII. It's normal. That happens. So the first step we've got to get really good at is organizing information. The second step is structuring information. Now, most revision guides and textbooks today that your child is learning from, they've got one agenda in mind. That's to sell revision guides and textbooks. That's why they cram so much information on a page. Now, if you're unlike me in school, I wasn't naturally academically gifted in school. For me, I'd have to slog an hours to do really well. And if you're like me, right now, if you're in school, if you've got a child in school, all of that information that's on the page, the minute they look at it, they blank out or become disengaged. And how many times have you had that when you were in school where you opened up a revision guide and all of a sudden you've just, again, the thought of just going through a topic that you're not interested in, struggling with, have no idea why you're learning, just starts to increase that emotional reaction you're feeling towards that subject. Hence why it's important to be able to organize it and structure that page. The third step is your ability to retain that information. In other words, get it in your head, get it in their head, and recall it. How many times have you noticed in your child that they can retain information really well, but when they get into a test or an exam, they just can't recall it? It's in their head, and they know it's in their head. They've learned it before, but they just can't articulate the answer. So step number 4 is their ability to recall it. And then that's when the magic happens. Step number 5, they begin to understand it. Your child's ability to understand what they're learning will increase significantly if they can organize, structure, retain, and recall it, even prior to understanding it. This is how I've coached so many students now who have taken topics that they don't know at all and haven't been taught yet. But if they can organize it, structure it, retain it, recall it, immediately they can just articulate a level of understanding towards it. It won't be complete mastery that they wouldn't have been able to do before. So they're the first 5 steps. Step number 6 is their ability to apply that information. How many times have you noticed in your children they're good at home when they're relaxed doing their homework, or in mock exams, or when they're getting just very light tests from teachers, but they get into a key exam and they crumble? Well, how many of you have got a child in a key exam year right now, and the thing that you're worried about the most is how they're going to perform in that exam? So application of information is really important. And then step number 7. Now, this is more so for GCSE and A-levels, is their ability to analyze that information, a key skill. So if you take multiple topics, for you to begin to get level 7s and 8s or 80, 90, 100% your child to get that, it's really important that they're able to take multiple topics and be able to learn those topics simultaneously, because that's where the big mark questions are going to be. And that's all about analyzing information, let alone if you're studying topics at A levels such as economics, politics, history, where analysis of information is critical. So remember I said you're going to box them into 3 areas. That was area number 1. Everything you need to know about getting them intellectually ready is down to those 7 steps. But what happens if they're good at all 7 of those, but they just put so much pressure on themselves? And this is what I'm talking about: emotional resilience, mental toughness. There are 5 key emotions that I want you to look out for. Now, I call this the cycle of doom. Number 1, when they're looking at their work, and this is just to backtrack, we want to make sure that they're not in this cycle of doom. If they're in this cycle of doom, it's very difficult to get out, and therefore what they start to do is repeat this cycle. And then it also becomes an identity for them. How many times have you heard them say, I'm just bad at this subject, or nothing ever works for me, or nothing's gone right for me? Emotion number 1 to look out for is when they're beginning to do their work, are they beginning to feel angry? Is that anger then turning into sadness? Is that sadness then turning into fear? They don't even want to start to do it because they're so fearful of getting it wrong. Do they then feel hurt at the fact that they can't do it and everyone else can do it? And this is the key one. This is why it's the final step in that cycle of doom, which is called guilt. Do they begin to feel guilty that learning's just not right for them? So if they're in that cycle of doom, you've not necessarily got an intellectual challenge, it's more an emotional challenge, and that's why they're failing school. And then I said number 3. And this is the most common scenario. It doesn't necessarily mean that, God, they're in the 3rd category, everything's going wrong. It's purely down to a blend of both. So if we take our 7 steps, are they really good at organizing and structuring information, but they just struggle to retain and recall it? So are they taking clear notes? Their work is in pristine condition, but they're just struggling to retain and recall it. Or they can organize, structure, retain, and recall really well. They can even understand it, but they're struggling to apply it in an exam context. Match that with the fact that if they're slightly older, and this has happened for years now, because most of this will start to manifest when they're about 11 to 12 years old, in some cases younger. If they then begin to, let's say, for example, it's a retention and a recollection issue, but it hasn't been addressed, they then begin to feel angry, they then begin to feel sad that they can't do it. You've got a blend of both emotional and intellectual barriers, intellectual challenges towards their learning. And I can promise you this, having been doing this now for 10 years, it will be because of one of these 3 areas, 2 of these 3 areas, or all 3 of these areas. So keep a lookout for these areas in your child. It's not going to be anything else. If they're turning up to school, that's going to be the challenge. And by addressing any one of those, by showing them how to learn, and by helping them developing that emotional resilience to break that cycle of doom, they're not only going to begin to survive in school, they're going to start to thrive in school. So that's it from me today. Before you leave, just smash that like button for me if you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment. I want to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.